Hello, this is Rebecca. I'm going to be making 18th century stays by the Mantua maker, number 1700-1. So I chose to use a quilting cotton for this in a pretty pink pattern, and I also have some pink cotton for lining and 2 layers of pink cotton canvas for interlining. So I decided to trace the pattern out so I can use it again in a different size if I need to. And I'm just laying out the pattern pieces, and I decided because I'm bigger than the biggest size on the pattern, which is true of most things, but I decided to give myself some extra room in the front piece and just added it to the center front on the fold because that's where I'm the largest, so adding a little bit of extra room there I think will be just fine without having to add a little bit to each seam, because the rest of the seams lined up just fine with that front seam or that front center being a little wider. Cutting out the pieces here. These stays have 4 layers. They have the outer layer of the fashion fabric, and then 2 layers of interlining canvas, and then a layer of interlining, which I'm using cotton flannel for, because I had a whole bunch laying around, and then another layer for the lining itself, which is I'm using a cotton broadcloth. So of course I repeated the cutting out process on all of the layers. Now I am laying out the first layer of interlining and putting all the pieces together. So I've attached the side front pieces to the center front pieces, and now I'm attaching the side pieces to the side front pieces. I'm attaching the side back pieces to the side pieces. And now attaching the center back pieces to the side back pieces. Checking to make sure it's going on the correct direction. So I did this to all of my layers. One layer did not end up correct, as you'll see later. Of course, then I repeated this process on the other 3 layers. Starting the process of sewing all of those pieces together with help from Thor. Not the god, the dog. Realizing I had not marked the stopping place on the side back pieces correctly. So doing some seam ripping and then I'll redo that. Sewing up all the seams, and I will of course repeat the process on all of the layers. Sewing down the fashion fabric. Onto the third layer of the interlining, and this is the one that I sewed up and then realized I had swapped the side back and the center back pieces, so they were on opposite sides and the wrong way up, and seam ripping. Resewing those seams. Time for ironing, my favorite part. Haha. allowance flat before I put the layers together. And Thor. Now my camera is focusing on the shoulder strap fabric and pattern piece blowing in the breeze from my fan. And Hercules' butt. The cat. I'm pinning the 2 layers of the canvas together. So I'm making sure these pieces line up. They don't necessarily have to line up absolutely perfectly. And in fact, the pattern said don't try to make them pinning the fashion fabric. And that's what it looked like all laid out. There's Hercules again, always in the way, but I love him. I'm basting the 3 of the layers together, the fashion fabric and the 2 layers of canvas. And I was following the instructions in the pattern, and of course I realized later that it would have made more sense to sew each individual piece, like baste each individual piece together and then sew them together. But this is what I did. I followed the pattern. There's Lucius in the background, kitty. And I decided while I was doing this to try out some different the different thimbles that I have. I usually use my leather thimble, and so, but I also have a rubber one and a metal one, and I'm not as adept with the metal one because I don't use it as much. So I gave it a try in some points because, as you see, my dog Loki got my leather thimble and chewed it up. So then I couldn't use it for a bit because it was gross. So I went with the rubber one, which I use more often, especially if I'm going through thick fabric. And so those are my 3 thimbles. So I decided to give the metal one a try for a while, and it just doesn't, I haven't learned to use it well yet. So I didn't use it for very long before going back to the rubber one. I'm just doing a very, pretty long running stitch. More Hercules sitting on my pattern. And now, because I wanted to sew the boning channels using a piece of boning, which I'm using industrial zip ties, I took out all of my basting stitches on one end to put the boning in. There's more Hercules sitting on my pattern. And this is where I decided it would have been easier if I had basted each individual piece together, run the boning channels, and then sewn them together. But I didn't do that because that's not what the instructions told me to do. So I'm decided to just mark the boning channels and sew them that way instead of trying to sew around the actual boning. Lucius and Hercules in my way. So since I decided that I was going to mark the boning channels, I kind of stopped the boning process and then I just sewed down along the seam lines to give me a guide for making sure all of my boning channels were straight when I marked them and sewed them. Here they are all marked. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for part 2. Like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thanks again.